So now we understand what we can learn from light. The next step is to gather and record the light. So the first device ever used to record light was the eye, or at least that's the first one that humans ever used. Okay, so the way that the eye works is the light first passes through the cornea. This is a clear layer at the front of the eye. Okay, and the cornea actually begins to focus the light. The light then passes through the pupil, which is an opening in the eye, and then through the crystalline lens. The crystalline lens is actually flexible, so depending on how the muscles pull on it will actually allow it to focus the light better until the light then hits the retina. The retina is the actual part of the eye that records the light. The retina is made of two types of specialized cells, cones and rods. Cones detect color, rods detect intensity. There are actually, for normal vision, there are three types of cones: red, green, and blue. If you've ever done stuff in something like Photoshop or some other photo editing software and it has RGB, that's red, green, and blue, those are the types of receptors our eyes actually have. For certain types of color blindness, what happens is you're missing one type of those cones, which means that it's harder to detect certain types of colors. So part of what the eye does is to actually focus the light onto the retina so that we have it nice and clear. Now, for most eyes, the retina refreshes about 30 times a second, meaning you can kind of think of it as your eye is taking a picture 30 times every second, and then your brain knows how to stitch it together so that you get nice fluid motion. The next device used was a camera. The idea is that we now have some sort of permanent thing that we can take a picture. Now, a camera works in a very similar way to the eye. We have light that enters and passes through a lens, which allows us to focus the light. The light then lands on some sort of material that allows us to record it. Originally, this was photographic film. In more recent cameras, it's going to be a digital, some sort of digital detector. Now, cameras have two main advantages over the eye. First, a camera can make a better detailed image than what we can do. Okay, so for a person to see something and then record the image, we have to draw. Okay, and in that translation, from seeing it to drawing it, we're going to lose some detail. Whereas with the camera, the light hits directly onto the recording surface, and so we're able to get much more detailed images. Something else the light can do that the eye can't is we can extend the exposure time. The exposure time is how long we allow the light to sit and record before we cut it off and actually develop the image. To give you an idea of some of the detail, so this is actually a photographic plate, so this is much older, and this is a negative. So the regions on this that are dark in color are actually normally bright. These are going to be where the stars are located, and the regions that are bright should actually be dark. That's the blackness of space. But what I want to point out is notice all of this very fine detail that we're getting from the photographic plate that normally we wouldn't be able to if we were just trying to draw it. Now, to help you understand kind of the difference of exposure time, so both of these images are actually of the Andromeda Galaxy. The Andromeda Galaxy is the nearest large galaxy to our own Milky Way. Depending on different measurements, it's about the same size or slightly larger than our Milky Way, and it's about 2.5 million light years away. Here is a very good view of the Andromeda Galaxy. This is actually slightly better than what your eye is going to be able to pick up on a dark night with no light pollution. Okay, so it's a little bit better than what we can do, although not much. Then, that is a relatively short exposure. Now compare that to this. Okay, so the Andromeda Galaxy extends from about there to there in this image, but compare the amount of detail and the amount of light that we're able to record. This is a much longer exposure, probably 15 minutes or so. Okay, so significantly longer, and now we're getting a lot more detail. You have no idea how much I have wished that I could change the exposure time on my retina. If I could stare up at the sky for 10 minutes and pick up detail and things like this with my own eye, that would be amazing. So hopefully sometime soon we'll develop robot bodies and I'll be able to start doing it. In more modern astronomy, we don't use photographic film. Instead, we use the same thing as digital cameras. It's called a CCD, which is a charge-coupled device. And this is a special type of computer chip that is set to record light. Each of these CCDs is actually made up of these little things called a pixel. Now, all the pixels do is count the number of photons that hit. And so if no photons hit, it says, oh, I've had 0 hits. Then as photons start to hit it, it counts 1, 2, 3, and so on. Then when we're ready to actually record the image, we read off the CCD, and we see what regions have zeros and what regions have other numbers, indicating that those are brighter, that they've recorded more light. Then the computer knows how to translate the sequence of zeros and ones into an actually readable image, so we can see where the stars are and what regions are brighter and darker. Now, the invention of CCDs actually helped astronomy jump a lot. For two main reasons. First, CCDs are more efficient. The old photographic film and plates that were being used were about 10% efficient. What that means is just 10% of all of the light that hit it was actually recorded. 90% of the light was lost, which means you're going to have a very long exposure to record enough light to get a lot of very good detail, especially on very faint objects. Modern CCDs are up to 90% efficient, meaning that 90% of that light is now recorded. Because we're recording 9 times more light, that means that we can significantly shorten how long the exposures are for the same faintness, or we can have much longer exposures and go to much fainter levels than what we could before. This has actually allowed us to reveal a lot of the very distant universe and start studying the universe as it used to be billions and billions of years ago. Something else that we can do with the CCD is that it produces a digital format, meaning you read it off directly into the computer, and then you can use the computer to begin analyzing and studying all of that light. In older times, you'd have to take the photographic plate and somehow scan it into a computer or try to analyze all the light by hand, which was slow and tedious. And so using CCDs has not only allowed us to see things we couldn't see before and record things much in shorter amounts of time than we could before, it has also allowed us to start processing a lot faster. All right, here's our first clicker question. The eye always has a longer exposure time than a camera. A true, B false. Go ahead and think about it, and we'll discuss in just a bit. The answer is B, false. You can change the exposure time on a camera so that it can be minutes, and I've actually even seen hours long. But for the eye, we're stuck at that 30 frames per second.